Hello, everybody. Welcome back. It's Brian and Miss Berlin for Breaking Down Security.
Hello, how's it going?
Wow, you sound like you are in a car driving back from Florida, the way you sound with your audio, Miss Berlin.
How did you know?
Oh, the magic of divination. You know, I did a perception check.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yep.
So, yeah. Thank you for coming on. And while you're driving back from Pensacola, I understand you got to see your son, who's right out of the Marine Corps or boot camp.
Yeah.
So that's awesome.
Yeah, first time since June.
That's fantastic.
We were both very happy. Got to spend quite a lot of time with him over the last 2 days, and yeah, took him out for he's never had sushi before.
Shut up.
So every letter that he wrote home during boot camp at some point in time mentioned food, because he was starving the whole time. And so one of the things he mentioned was he wanted to try sushi. So I'm like, nice. Well, we're in Pensacola, so we're near the ocean. We might want to try some sushi. So I found a place and we went and had some lunch today. So that was pretty cool.
Yes, Pensacola, the sushi capital of the world. Sure...
better than Ohio sushi.
That's true. I guess Ohio sushi is what, deep fried or something. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
at least it's closer to the ocean.
That's true. That's true. How long is he going to be in Pensacola?
4 months at least.
Okay.
He's still waiting to even start training.
Oh wow. Okay.
So yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I did A school, which is the school, your basic school, when I got out of boot camp in Biloxi, Mississippi, and that was really nice because it was an Air Force base. So I went to Great Lakes, Illinois, in dead of winter. As a matter of fact, I graduated January 23rd in Chicago.
Wow.
And went to Mississippi where it was 60 degrees, and I was like, yeah. And it was an Air Force base. It was an Air Force base. So the food and the facilities were far better than the Navy base in Great Lakes that I had been at. So, yeah, I appreciate everything that he's doing. And, yeah, I thank you and Michael for his service. So.
Cool. He's finally getting used to that being said to him too, because this was his first time going out in public in his uniform. So
yeah. Well, I hope he stays safe and he doesn't get out there for spring break and go nuts when because it doesn't get cold there. So going to the beach is probably still a thing unless they shut the state down again. So. So we are doing I would call this a special episode because this is going to be a very timely episode. We are waiting for Mr. Betcher. He's got a family thing going, so if he shows up, great. If he doesn't, that's fine too. But we are talking about election security, and if you're like, oh my God, we're gonna, it's all gonna end up being a shouting match and whatever. We've talked to this gentleman before, back in 2018, about the processes that were going on in the state of Ohio at the time. His name's Jmio. Jeremy, thanks for coming on again.
Yeah, definitely. Great to be here.
Cool. Jeremy, tell everybody about yourself and what you have to do in regards to the election process in the state of Ohio.
So yes, my name's Jmio. As you said, I'm the Information Security Officer for Cuyahoga County. So we're one of the largest counties in the state of Ohio, as well as one of the larger counties in the nation. So as you can see, there's a lot that we have to assist and help out. We also are lucky to have centralized IT services, and one of those services is security services for the Board of Elections. So a lot of Board of Elections throughout the state and nation don't have dedicated security services, either third party or absolutely nothing. And that's changed highly over the past 4 years.
Cool. All right. So when we had you on in 2018, and we have a link in the show notes if you want to go and check out the one we did in 2018, I believe that was the same year that DEF CON had their election and voting village, if you will, when back in the halcyon days when we all had conferences in person. And there was a story in the news about an 11-year-old that had done SQL injection on an election machine. And we had you on to talk about that because we wanted to find out how realistic that was in the real world, how easy it is to get access to those boxes, how tamper resistant those boxes are. And that was excellent. You can listen to that. The link is in the show notes of this episode. In the 2 years that has happened, obviously we've had a major pandemic, social distancing. Everybody's dealing with the ramifications of COVID, whether they like it or not. What I wanted to find out was first, what is the state of Ohio doing to try to make it so that as many people as possible can vote instead of there must have been the way you were doing it before this is not the way you're doing it now. So maybe we could talk a little bit about how it's working in the state of Ohio.
Yeah, so I mean, from a pandemic perspective, the state of Ohio within this area has provided a lot of safety measures for the pandemic, but voting has not changed as much as you think it would. One of the major things that the Board of Elections have done throughout the state has really urged voters to vote early and as well as vote by mail. The state of Ohio has been a vote by mail as well as early voting. The state of Ohio is actually one of the few states that not only does early voting on the weekdays, but also the weekends. So that includes Saturday and Sunday. For what I understand, there's only about single-digit states in the United States that offer Sunday voting for early voting.
Okay.
So early voting's been a pretty big process, and with that, the Board of Elections has been attempting to get everyone in as early as possible. So, and also create additional larger voting polling locations during the pandemic to be able to spread people out. So there have been some polling location changes to get people in a lot larger areas for that distance. One example is we have the Rocket Mortgage field house, which is where the Cavs play. That will be a downtown voting polling and voting location when it used to be in the Old Stone Church, which was a very small kind of basement in a church. So it's a lot different and a lot more larger area. So things like that have changed. But other than that, it's really been kind of similar as the rest of the state and the rest of the area, trying to make sure people know where to vote and when to vote and really how to vote. A lot of people may have never voted by mail. So really understanding how to request that ballot, how to fill it out, and how to drop it off or mail it in have been a pretty interesting thing that the Board of Elections has had to figure out.
That's cool. Yeah, the Washington State has had a massive mail-in system for a while, and I believe you can actually go and physically vote as well. But we voted, I think, a week and a half ago, and already sent ours in, so we didn't have to try to find out where we could go vote at if we wanted to. And I understand there's NBA and NFL teams that are also opening up their stadiums, like you said, with the Cleveland Cavaliers there, the basketball team, to open their venue up for voting, which is helping the flow and making sure that people can do so somewhat safely. So that's much appreciated. Question about so some of the stuff we talked about the last time was how we're handling ballots, and for those folks that did not or have not listened to that episode yet. How has anything changed with the way ballots are being handled with regard to, I'm sure you're getting more mail-in ballots, more absentee ballots. How are those being handled once they, are mailed in or, handed off into a drop box?
Yeah, so there was unfortunately in the state of Ohio, there's only one ballot drop-off location within reason per county. That was recently overturned. A lot of things unfortunately have gone to the legislation and the judges to go back and forth about very, very detailed specifics on how the boards of elections at the county level can function. So having only one ballot drop-off location creates obviously a bottleneck. So those, as ballots fill up, they have to be emptied and stored, right? So there's been a lot of process improvement and logistics to be able to make sure that those containers and those things can not fill up and get transferred to the locations that they need to be at. And the other kind of thing about that is the counting. So the amount of vote by mail and ballots that are coming in are obviously more than previous. I don't have this. We are still here. Are you still there?
Yeah, she's got some issues, driving and stuff, so she may go in and out. So you were talking about ballots?
Yeah, so the ballot counting, there's had been additional, I would say, machines purchased for ballot counting to be able to make sure that all those ballots can be counted in a more automated fashion instead of having all the temporary workers that have to go and count those ballots, or more so sort those ballots to be counted and make sure those ballots are filled out correctly. And there's a lot of specifics to a ballot to make sure that ballot is filled out correctly. So there's been a lot of process improvements with that, a lot of additional technology that's been incorporated to make sure that those are sorted correctly and made sure that they're also valid in general for counting.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That sounds good. As you change process or, do any kind of process improvement, there's going to be some changes or unseen circumstances that will have to be accounted for when you're doing these things. I see we have Miss Berlin back. She may go in.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
It's not the best connection when you're driving through. I think I'm in Alabama.
Oh, I'm sorry. Don't stop. Keep driving.
My question was, and I don't know, you maybe answered this when I disconnected. Did any of the actual InfoSec or anything that you handled change just because you moved from the bottom of a tiny church to the Cavs stadium. So are they involved technology wise at all? Does that go into any IR planning stuff?
So all the polling locations are outside our scope from information security perspective. So all of the polling locations don't have any technology in them until days, week before the election. So when the voting machines are delivered and then stored, and then the poll books kind of go into that. We have e-poll books in the state or in Cuyahoga County, and then those are set up. All of those are set up through their own private networks, and they don't connect to any type of infrastructure at any one polling location. So no matter if the polling location is at a giant stadium or if it's at a small church, nothing changes from an InfoSec perspective other than potentially connection issues or things like that have to be understood. But there's a lot of logistics from a physical security perspective that are done, and those are primarily done through the Board of Elections and the Sheriff's Office and potentially other local law enforcement in each one of the cities.
Okay, so you won't be hooking into, say, the Cleveland Cavaliers wireless network to be able to send stuff out. I assume it's using some kind of like cellular connection or something like that. I mean, let's not. I don't want to get too specific if you can't say anything.
All the voting machines are not connected. They are offline. They don't have any type of capabilities to be connected. But the e-poll books do connect to only send like heartbeat information. They don't actually transfer any type of personal identifiable information or anything like that. All those items are actually loaded on the devices where they're sent out. So each device can operate without any type of internet connection. The only type of information that's sent is metric and statistic data to be able to assist the Board of Elections to see voter turnout.
Okay, so it's stored on a thumb drive or something like that locally on the box, and then those thumb drives or electronic data is transferred somehow to be counted, or is it a paper output? How does that work?
So in Cuyahoga County, everything has paper backups. Each voting machine does have a USB stick that is secured in the inside of it. After the voting, that is taken and put into a I would say sealed and contained bag that is then escorted to the tabulation center where the votes are then counted.
Okay, is that a two-person integrity thing? So there's a chain of custody during the whole the whole evolution there, or is it a?
Yep.
Okay, all right, cool. Because I mean, obviously, you'd want to reduce the chances of tampering or replacement of that one with one that looks less legit or more as legit but has modified data or something like that. So that's good to have that kind of chain of custody. You've mentioned these voting booths in Cuyahoga County. Are these the same booths that are all over Ohio? Because I think the last time we talked on the 2018 show, there had been some technology issues with regards to making sure that everybody had the same information or data or technology. Has that gotten better, or is it much the same as it was in 2018?
I think it's gotten a little bit better. There have only been some small, I would say, standardizations, but there are different types of technology throughout there. But in the state of Ohio, there are paper backups for each, so that obviously provides a auditing and integrity from that perspective. But they all function in the same. They all have some type of removal media that needs to be transported to a tabulation center.
Okay, makes sense. Mr. Betcher's joined us, so he'll be asking some questions here. Hello, sir. We're interviewing Jeremy Mio. So let me see. So we've talked a little bit about the technology. We've talked a little bit about the election security and how it's being done at venues. There's been a number of security directives that have come out, and these are in the show notes as well. The cybersecurity directives, 2018-15. Can you maybe explain a little bit about what each of those are? You mentioned EI-ISAC membership. What was the need, or what precipitated all these different directives? The 2018-15-30, 2019-07-08. What precipitated the need for those?
Yeah, so around 2018, and I think it even started in 2016. After once election security started getting, I would say, more the forefront. And there's some people that have been in this for a pretty long time. Is a lot of funding started to come out, and then obviously with DEF CON in 2018, that really started to snowball the need and the kind of force for something to be done. If it wasn't maybe the voting machine specifically, but everyone could definitely see that boards of elections around the nation didn't have adequate IT support, let alone cybersecurity, and just even from administration to the actual machines and things themselves. So these directives came out. The state of Ohio, I think, was pretty much on the forefront of coming out with major directives to be able to enforce cybersecurity initiatives and requirements down to the county level. Some of the big one, the 2018 was the big step forward with that. And some of the main things in that 2018 directive was EI-ISAC membership. That's the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is run in coordination with Homeland Security and also the MS-ISAC, which is the multi-state Information Sharing and Analysis Center. That ISAC gives a lot of services for free through Homeland Security funding, as well as their own funding through their nonprofit. Some of those things is an IDS system, an intrusion detection system called Albert. It's a spinoff of the federal government's Einstein program. So what's different about this is they actually give you either a piece of software in a virtual environment or a piece of hardware to be able to detect certain, just like your basic IDS, but with additional threat intelligence that they can put in there, and it reports back to them. This was really big that every county in the state of Ohio was required to get one of these and then work through the EI-ISAC. Another big thing, and I have it highlighted in the show notes, is the Elections Infrastructure Security Assessment. This was a required security assessment that every county had to do in the state of Ohio by an approved third-party vendor to see where they were. And this aligned to the CIS benchmarks, the CIS controls. Sorry.
Right.
And with that, they were rated on those CIS controls. And they really, at the time, didn't really know what was going to come after that. But as you can see later in the directives, we'll talk about all the high priority findings had to be remediated by a certain timeline. So the state also shared what they were doing in that 2018 directive. They were upgrading to Windows 10 at the time. They were doing some modernization. The other thing was that they were trying to push multi-factor authentication. And two of the really big ones that ended up working out very well with the state was they did a cloud email pilot and an IT support pilot. A lot of boards of elections have a really small office, and they're either paying a third party to support them, or they don't have anyone to support them. And it might be, it's pretty interesting to see how each one functions to get their IT services. The state of Ohio provided a platform for small boards of elections to be able to get their Office 365 services and their IT support directly through the Secretary of State, more like a shared service model, which I think overall creates cost efficiencies, as well as the Secretary of State is definitely going to know how they're operating if they are giving services directly to them.
Okay, so that was
all happening in 2018.
Okay, so there's a modernization there, trying to standardize everybody across the same system. Obviously email, having everybody under the same email means you can do things like restrict domains. You could say, you don't need to have email coming from external organizations, or you could have tar pitting or what have you. All of your IT is happening in one place, so you don't have to worry about whether or not you're getting good IT support, I'd imagine, which is
right.
Which is excellent. MFA, is this just MFA across the board, or just ones that might be for systems that are connected to election systems?
So at that time in that directive, they were giving examples. So they were at that point in time, they were giving examples of things they were looking for boards of elections to do, but they weren't mandating at that time. One of them was MFA. They did talk about MFA directly to voter registration systems, but they were talking about MFA across the entire board.
Okay. All right. Mr. Betcher, did you want to ask something? Have you been brought up to speed?
No, I'm coming in cold, but my question was more along the lines of chain of custody. I don't know if that's what we're talking about or if you guys have already discussed it.
Go for it.
Well, go ahead and ask the question. I know we asked a little bit about how the ballots get collected, but I mean, you may have another question.
No, I mean, walk me through chain of custody. When someone walks into a booth, that vote has to be secure all the way to when it is counted. Is it automatically counted on some server, or how does that work?
Yeah, we did talk a little bit about that, where
Okay.
all of the voting systems are not networked. They're not hooked up to a wireless network. There's a thumb drive or something inside. They collect the data. It's a two-person thing. They have to mark down how everything's collected, and it's pretty much escorted. Each one is escorted to the counting booths or to the counting organizations where they're counted and
Okay.
tabulated.
Yeah, so that's very similar to the traditional stick your ballot in a lockbox, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Good.
yeah. So the 2018 directive, modernizes the election infrastructure, which is great. The 2019's talk, it seems like you got to a baseline with regard to the 2018 directives. The 2019 talks more about security event reporting. Looks like there might be some logging, some vulnerability management issues. Maybe you could talk a little bit about why 2019 was building upon that, or actually says expansion of the 2017 directive. So was there a need for additional controls like DMARC and all those on those systems?
Yeah, so the 2019 directive, I put in there just so everyone kind of saw the timeline of events there. The 2019 directive that came first in May was an expansion for security event reporting. So all boards of elections were required to send information on events, security related, like intrusions or phishing, and all those to one centralized location through a liaison. So they kind of, I would say, optimize that. But really that then came the 2019-08 directive, which was pretty massive
Right.
from previous directives. It really built on it. And I can only speculate from the, how these directives were really built out. But I could tell you that the 2018 directive with the infrastructure security assessments definitely laid the roadmap of where the state wanted to go and what they knew was possible or where the gaps were. So in 2019, they required everyone to, this is mid 2019, so this is on in June of 2019, to remediate all high priority findings to that 2018 assessment by January 31st, 2020. They also made all the Homeland Security services that boards of elections are able to get for free mandatory. So some of those things that not only boards of elections, but all SLTT, state, local, tribal, and territory governments can get is risk and vulnerability assessments, remote pen tests, architectural design reviews, and cyber threat hunts. And previously, were also requested phishing tests and vulnerability scanning. So all those additional services became mandatory for every county in the state of Ohio, which created, I believe, a bottleneck in Homeland Security services. But they definitely worked through a lot of those because those services are requested and used throughout the nation, let alone just one state.
Right.
The big thing within this directive was also additional technical requirements. And there was about 100 pages of additional technical requirements that went through DMARC and segmentation and a lot of more specific information security requirements that boards of elections had to do, which really cut out a lot of the vague requirements that were previously talked about. So MFA got very specific on, voter registration systems and, all email external facing systems, things like that.
Okay. Now, are these Ohio specific? Because you mentioned Department of Homeland Security, the multi-state ISAC, EI-ISAC. Are these being adopted nationwide, or is it just, state by state is going to have different ideas on how this is? Or is it like a NIST guideline where it's like, okay, you must have at least this level, in every state, and then it's like if you want to go that much further, you can. What does that look like?
So these specific directives are about the state of Ohio. So the Secretary of State is pushing these down to all the counties. All these DHS services and EI-ISAC items as well are available to all boards of elections throughout the whole nation. So anyone could adopt these same things. And from what I've seen in the community, a lot have of just kind of, I wouldn't say copied, but taken a lot of the things inside of the Ohio state directives and started doing them as well.
Okay. All right.
Now, what do you? I know our community tends to talk about election security a lot, especially when it comes around to this time of year. What do you think are some of the myths or rumors that you've heard that are something that you would like to dispel, I guess? Or if you heard any, or from just on the news or whatever?
I think that collectively as an industry, and there's always going to be those things that might be myths out there and things like that. But I think from an overall industry, with the amount that we have beaten election security, at least from a cybersecurity perspective, I think people have really turned from that cybersecurity perspective and gone back down to the chain of custody issues, where the ballots are at, what happens post-election, how ballots aren't counted until, days, if not certified, a week or so after the election. I think a lot of people have gained a whole level of educational awareness about how election processes work, that now they're focusing on kind of the logistics and just how massive our, I would say, election process is overall, more than the technology and cybersecurity around it. I mean, it definitely is very important still, but I think people have started to focus on all the areas that we've always kind of said during the first, when DEF CON, started talking about the voting machines. I think a lot of people in the industry were like, well, there's all these other things we should be looking at. And now we are. And I think that as a nation, we've kind of definitely elevated our awareness of election processes. And we all, I think, are really aware of disinformation, misinformation, operations that are happening. And that's a big thing that happens. And it's a very tough thing to mitigate. And I think that people really understand that aspect much more than they did in 2016.
So one of the things in the 2019 directive not only was, doing things like vulnerability assessments, running scans on your internet facing election systems, remote pen tests, threat intelligence, that kind of stuff. Mentions background checks. When I saw that, I was thinking, well, I guess insider threat would be a thing. Was that when you're doing threat models or threat assessments, incident response kind of stuff, is insider threat something that is a concern to the state of Ohio in regards to the elections?
So insider threats, always been a threat model. The background checks were so there were background checks before but it's very difficult to background check 4,000 poll workers that you're going to hire for essentially one day, right? Mm-hmm. So like in Cuyahoga County, there's potentially over 4,500 poll workers that all of a sudden have different levels of access to this information that are hired for essentially one day. Some they're hired for a little longer if they're doing poll worker management or if they're a different role or a high level role. And there's a whole hierarchy there, but it's very interesting to understand the kind of the level of insider threat that you could imagine that exists at that level when you're taking 4,500 people essentially off the streets and having them work in a pretty sensitive process. Mm-hmm. So previously in a lot of areas, background checks just weren't even feasible without substantial cost. So there were still checks that were done, but not full background checks. That's a problem throughout the nation. They are now required under the state of Ohio for election workers.
Okay. All right.
But it is probably one of our largest threat models there because of as you can imagine, a poll worker or a set of poll workers, trying to do something nefarious.
Sure. And as of we're recording this on November the 1st at 7:22 p.m. Pacific time, which is like almost 10:30 Eastern. Depending on which surveys or polls that you read, Ohio is one of the dead heat the dead heat states where it's kind of almost a tie with regards to this. So, a couple thousand votes here or there, or, if somebody can find a way to influence the election from an insider threat area, it could potentially do something. So, we talked a little bit before the show as well about, I made the funny haha comment that it seemed like the Academy Awards receives more scrutiny in terms of audits than the U.S. democratic process. What do you and your organization in the state of Ohio do to ensure that there's audits done? Do you have an inspector general kind of thing where it's an uninterested third party? Do you have groups from outside the state come in and help audit and make sure that everything was followed correctly, the chain of custody, the counting and the voting, and that all the machines have been verified as accurate? Do you have anything like that?
So yeah, and under one of the directives, and I don't believe it might not be in one of the ones that I labeled here, more specific on cybersecurity, do now require post-election audits to be done throughout the state. Some of the larger counties have previously done those anyway, but it was always it's costly to do. And other, places in the nation have, tried to do, more specific audits, more than a full post-election audit. So there's different ways to do election audits throughout the nation. I'm not an election audit, expert myself, more focused on the cybersecurity, but that is something that is done in the state of Ohio, but done differently throughout each county. So you might have a third party that does it one county. It might be a self audit in one county. I can't really say the specifics of each county's auditing processes, but they are now required under the state directives.
Okay, sounds good. During my research here, I noticed that the state of Ohio also has a vulnerability disclosure policy, and it appears that we've talked about this in earlier in the year with other people we've interviewed. Folks like Katie Masuris about vulnerability disclosure. We've talked about supply chain security issues. Your vulnerability disclosure policy on the Ohio website, ohiosos.gov, mentions that if you're a security researcher and you are testing one of about 10 at least called out domains, and you find a vulnerability, you can report it without fear of reprisal, which I wouldn't say shocked, but I'm like, that's kind of refreshing to see. How are y'all running that? Is it a bug bounty program, or is it just a vulnerability disclosure program? How are you doing that?
Yeah, can you not pay taxes if you find something good?
No, yeah.
So in January of 2020, Homeland Security released a directive and for federal agencies, and more so guidelines for state and local governments about how to do vulnerability disclosure and their recommendations on that. So I don't say a lot of states, I don't think many states have actually taken that directive to heart yet. But the state of Ohio has done that. And it's actually a recommendation through the Homeland Security directives for vulnerability disclosure to have, that type of language in there, which also works through, I believe, disclosure.io, which is some best practices and safe harbors for security researchers.
Okay. I did find it kind of ironic that the vulnerability disclosure policy has a great form at the bottom where you can, submit your vulnerability. But it's also in scope because it's on the ohiosos.gov website. So, I was asking if somebody had actually tested the vulnerability disclosure form for, vulnerabilities itself. Have you had much luck with this vulnerability disclosure form, or is this something that, is a nice to have on the website, but nobody's actually used it yet?
So the vulnerability disclosure form on the state of Ohio's website is essentially an iframe to HackerOne, which runs the actual disclosure process. So the actual form itself, even though it's displayed on the site, it is not actually on being hosted by the state of Ohio, from my understanding.
Okay.
So they partnered with HackerOne to be able to triage and assist and be able to, validate vulnerabilities within scope or not within scope. I'm not sure how successful it has been so far. It's relatively new for the state of Ohio. I know that I've seen a few public articles on researchers in the area that have gone through and found some interesting items and reported them. I'm not really sure how that's gone or what they've reported has gone in scope or been, triaged by any means. Right. I know that from a county perspective, we are looking and looked to do a vulnerability disclosure process and policy ourselves, but we were unfortunately not able to get it out before the election. But we will be having that before the end of the year, which we will, do something very similar to the state of Ohio. It might be a little more targeted, being a smaller entity ourselves. So we have a little more flexibility than the state does.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. Yeah. I see it says the guidelines, you make every effort to avoid privacy violations, degradation, user experience, disruption of systems, or destruction or manipulation of data. Only test to the extent necessary to confirm a vulnerability. Don't compromise or exfil data. Establish command line access or pivot to other systems. Use identified comms channels to report vulnerability to us. And you've also given 120 calendar days to after you've notified the Secretary of State's office for detail. Who gets those emails? Does it go to a lolvuln at ohiosos.gov? I mean, who actually has those for action if they were to come in, and how do you handle, and how does the, if how does the state handle that coordinated
So
response?
I'm pretty sure all of that's handled by HackerOne's vulnerability disclosure program. So
Okay.
that's triaged by HackerOne. I am sure that somebody within the state gets those as well to assist in that triage. But I can't speak on the specific processes too much. But I do know that the state of Ohio, from what we've been working with them, has expanded their cyber workforce specific to the Secretary of State's office tremendously. Because I know there's new staff that we're working with every other week that seems to be getting hired there. So that's good, really good to see.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, I'm sorry I didn't know what the scope of your purview was on all this. So I appreciate the insights there. I guess it would be good to know that if you are looking for bug bounty experience, that might be a good way to get started. Is to find a responsible site like ohiosos.gov and work on the vulnerability. Look for vulnerabilities there. So there you go. Let me see what else. We got about 13 minutes left on my egg timer here. So, Ms. Berlin, Mr. Betcher, did you have any other thoughts or questions, comments? What is,
I did before, but I couldn't write it down, so I can't remember.
Okay. How about you, Mr. Betcher?
No questions.
Okay. So walk me, tomorrow or today, what does the next 72 hours look like in the life of Jeremy Mio with regards to the election? I'm imagining not a lot of sleeping, but I could be wrong. So what does it look like for you?
Yeah, so we've been in general operations for election security for about a week now, going through and triaging any type of threat intelligence or other types of information that we see through our federal partners or state partners. We've also had a few tabletops specific to election day, and we will start ramping up operations midday tomorrow to go throughout the election day, all the way to the morning. So we work with our emergency operations center as well as standing up our kind of SOC in a box, where we will be monitoring taking baseline data, which is mostly already taken, and then seeing if any baseline data changes. We also take a lot of additional network information during the pre-election day and then during election day, different times, just to see if there's any type of baseline changes. And then going through all the way until the last vote is at least counted or tabulated on site for the voting machine specifically. So we have a whole kind of election operations timeline that kind of starts, I would say it's already started, but it starts tomorrow at a higher level, going more so 24/7 all the way to Wednesday morning, essentially.
Okay. All right. So you said sock in a box. If all of the voting machines are, not connected to a network, what systems are you needing to monitor to ensure the election is done as fairly as it can be?
So we monitor the Board of Elections general services, their back office equipment during the election that they use to do logistics, right? So there's a lot of polling locations. There's a lot of back office infrastructure that helps them do their jobs during election day. We make sure those systems are up and running and available. There's also the centralized location that the tabulation happens at. So we ensure the integrity of just that building's infrastructure in general. Even though the tabulation center inside that building is air gapped and offline, we want to make sure that there aren't any attempts to try to get to that infrastructure at all, even if it's air gapped. So we're monitoring for that. So that's pretty much our focus area. We used to, in certain parts of, I would say, general elections. So when you have all those tabulations have to go somewhere.
Right.
A lot of people, I mean, maybe so now people think about this, but you have 88 counties in the state of Ohio. Those votes, once they're tabulated in that offline area, they still have to go somewhere. They have to go to the state. They don't get driven down to Columbus. They do get sent to the state, and there are different ways they do that. They are definitely do that in a much better way than they ever have before. And we just make sure that that process goes efficiently.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
You mentioned, oh, good.
No, go ahead, Ms. Berlin, please.
You mentioned that you've done like tabletops and stuff like that. Can you talk about it all? How, like, what those look like? Do you bring in the Board of Elections? Do you bring in, physical security? Who, like, I don't know if you can talk about any of that at all.
So the tabletop exercises that we've done have been operated and managed by both the Secretary of State and Homeland Security. They have do the tabletops not only for one county but all the counties. So those happen in bulk. So you'll have maybe 10 counties here, 15 counties there that have their Board of Elections representatives, their IT people, and some of them have the IT security people or their partners, and then they will have a physical representative as well, depending on the location, to go through different types of scenarios and see how overall a tabletop is always going to be the worst possible day. So there's a lot of interesting things that they focused on: how to respond to misinformation, how to respond for, again, pre-election activity of things failing, all kinds of different supply chain issues, and then even, potentially like availability of systems on the day of election that might not impact the actual voting counts, but they definitely don't paint a good picture for the integrity of a voting system, or I guess the elections themselves, and how to communicate that to the public and how to make sure you have your instant response process ready to be able to respond. Like an example that that somebody might have is if as unfortunate as it might be, if a Board of Elections website is defaced, it does not mean that it's automatically the entire voting machines and all the elections are compromised. But how do you respond to something like that happening? Right.
Yeah, I guess with everybody being as sensitive as it is, even the smallest thing could be conflated to throw or cast doubt on an election, the election. So, well, yeah, I guess you have to work with your PR and your marketing. Well, I don't say marketing, but your PR people to make sure that you get the right answer out there, because it can't be like, when companies get breached, it's like, oh, no customer data has ever been accessed. And then 2 days later, well, some customer data has been accessed. And then a week later, oh, we're completely ass up. And, you kind of have to get the right answer out there almost immediately. So that's kind of interesting thought there. So we have about 5 minutes left. Jeremy, did you have any other things that you wanted to talk about? Any last thoughts before we end?
Yeah, just to kind of go over, I'm not going to go over those directives, but when you go through those directives and kind of listening to what I'm talking about, Yeah, I know that even I would respond like, well, that's all basic information security. Now they're making this mandated and they're doing these things. Some people don't realize that their board of elections throughout the nation are like almost like mom and pop businesses. I think our smallest board of elections has 2 people that are employed at it full time, not IT people, like 2 people fully. And then, they have those volunteers, I would say half the counties, half the board of elections in the state of Ohio have a smaller employee count than just my security operations team. So a lot of these places, don't have any type of, IT services and IT backgrounds, let alone now having to stand up against nation states and certain other types of initiatives and have, we didn't really talk about the 2020 directives, but to have EDR now mandated across the whole county and vulnerability management, where you now not only have vulnerability management, but you have critical and high SLAs are big. So they now mandate service level agreements for patching that you have to, send down to the state when requested. And there's just a lot more that is happening that even the smallest elections jurisdiction has to, work through, right? And some of the big things we didn't talk about a lot are the cybersecurity liaisons that are the states look to fund to help, these small organizations have somebody that's trusted to help them out and not just somebody they're hiring that they don't really know the questions and stuff to ask. So just think about, whatever state you live in and your boards of elections, you might live in a large city that they have a large, operations, but there are a lot of small places that don't have these resources. And now, all of a sudden within the past 4 years, they've, definitely leveled up in a maturity level for their cybersecurity practices pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah, I lived in Missouri most of my life, and I can only imagine how some of those places in South Central Missouri or whatever that probably don't have a lot of like you said, there's just 2 people running it, or it's the same 5 people who've been running it for years. And so when you mentioned endpoint detection and response and setting up EDRs and running the scanning and stuff, I'm assuming. See, I'm going to a bad place here where it's like they're not doing any of that. That's like basic hygiene stuff. And is that being taken off of their plate and being done, say, remotely, like by by a third party or an MSSP or something like that?
Yeah, so the state, I think, did a pretty strategic use of their funding that they've got. And they did get an MSSP and as well as themselves to help manage and take on those services for all these smaller counties. We're a different county, so we already had these services being utilized, but we also are now utilizing some of their services on top of ours. There's some redundancy or and duplicate work there, but at the end of the day, it's all for good measure, and it gets up to the state to be able to run, say, an IP kind of threat intelligence. If they got, some IOCs of threat intelligence, they could run them across all 88 counties from a single platform. Okay.
Very cool. All right, so we have a minute left. Jeremy, if anybody had any questions about the election, hopefully after the election, they could ask you questions, or maybe another election official is listening to this in Nevada or Montana or California and would like to find out more about some of the stuff that Ohio's doing from a security point of view. How would they get a hold of you?
So you can definitely get a hold of me via our website, itsecurity.cuyahogacounty.us. You can put that in the short notes. You could also, I wouldn't say I will respond immediately. You can DM me on Twitter in my handles in the show notes. And I could also put my email address in there as well. Again, not sure how quickly I will respond, but definitely before the end of the year, we'll hope to be freed up a lot after the elections.
He'll respond way
make sure
quicker
to,
if you show up to one of our trainings.
What kind of trainings does Jeremy and Amanda do?
Tabletop.
Oh, is this the tabletop detect and defense thing?
Yeah.
I see. Okay.
Our Shell Corporation.
Oh, well, easy there. Easy there. We're talking about election security, and then you go into the Shell Corporation thing. Let's not do that. Let's keep going. Jeez, you're killing me. Uncomfortable pause. Okay. Well, I think, I'm sure that there's a lot of people out there who are, wondering just how fair it's going to be, or what they're expecting there. I hope that everybody gets out and votes, and it sounds like as long as these stay funded, and it continues to happen. What do you see the future looking like with regards to more stuff? I know you've got a lot of stuff here working, endpoint security, SIM and logging, patching and such. If you had, let's say somebody wrote you a check for cash, and what would the next steps for you look like in a security program for this state?
Yeah, so I mean, again, being only have a purview of one of the larger counties in the state, I definitely think building out, some of the vulnerability disclosure policies and partnerships with security researchers, and getting more, I would say, transparency and involvement between the communities is definitely going to be, I think, that next level. I think that, the 2018 DEF CON kind of shook everybody in different regards. And I think that now they're starting, at least I see them starting to come together now that, basic foundation security practices are being done. They're being validated. And now they're going to that next level from like a continuous kind of maturity model there. I really think that next level is community engagement and building on that kind of that integrity of the voting machines and the processes and logistics. I also know that the state of Ohio in general is up for a I would say refresh of voting machines, the actual hardware. And that's, I think, going to be really big in the state of Ohio. There's already been in 2020 a few demos of new voting equipment, which means new voting tabulation equipment. I think that's going to be the next focus in election security, at least for the state of Ohio, and specifically more, Cuyahoga County.
Okay. Yeah, I can already hear the blockchain VCs powering up with their angel monies, trying to corner the market on an accurate voting machine or whatever. Cool. Ms. Berlin, Mr. Betcher, any questions you'd like before we go?
Nope.
Okay, sounds great. All right. Well, that was it for Breaking Down Security this week.